roughly 1.25 million Americans are patients with type 1 diabetes requiring insulin. Millions more around the world also require insulin for their diabetes. Are the are the pharmaceutical companies of this country and of this planet ripping them and us off? Here to talk about that with us now is Karyn Wofford. Karyn is herself a type 1 diabetic and wellness specialist. She is also a freelance writer. Also joining us is Fran Quigley. Fran is the coordinator of People of Faith for access to medicines, and the website notes that access to medicine is a moral imperative and a human right. So Karyn and Fran, first of all, thanks to both of you for joining us.
Yeah, of course.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Oh, absolutely. It's such an important topic. And why don't we start with Karyn on this one for the first question. Karyn, you recently wrote a commentary that was published in Truth Out talking about Eli Lilly's Insulin for All demonstration project, Stop Price Gouging People with Diabetes. What's that all about?
Well, pretty much, we've gotten together. I'm also a T1 international advocate with PFAM and several other organizations to demonstrate outside of Eli Lilly on September 9th. And we are asking them to be more transparent about their prices with the ultimate goal of bringing the insulin prices down so people can have access to this life-saving medication.
Okay, you mentioned two issues there, and before we go to Fran, just a quick follow-up for you, Karyn. So you mentioned two things regarding this upcoming demonstration, the project that you guys are working on to create a demonstration there. One is price gouging or high prices. The other is transparency. Let's start with transparency. Why is that an issue?
Well, because of this type of medication and because so many people depend on it to live, we're asking that them be transparent about how much it costs to make this product so we can see if everything's kind of matching up, because people can't afford it and people are becoming ill, and just this particular type of medication, it's a lot different than anything else, that you can compare to it. So yeah, we're asking that them be more transparent so we'll know why the prices are so high, because we need to understand.
So, okay, and Fran Quigley, we are talking about a principle that extends, of course, well beyond just the issue of insulin and diabetics, as large scale as that issue is, and that is the notion that if we believe that access to medication is a right, that it is a moral imperative for us as a society to make sure that people have access to the medication they need, how can we make those kinds of moral decisions as a society if we don't even know some of the basic facts, like how much it costs to produce a medication, for example?
Well, you're exactly right, RJ. There's a real contradiction there, and that is that in many respects we do in the U.S. and certainly in other developed countries, we treat medicines access as a human right. We do invest an enormous amount of government and taxpayer dollars in not just purchasing the medicines, but in developing and doing the research to create the medicines to begin with. But in the middle of that process, in the U.S. in particular, but globally to some extent, we just hand over monopoly patent rights to private companies, corporations, and then they are allowed to charge whatever they want. And of course, as Karyn said, this is a life essential product, and folks will pay whatever they need to in order to survive. But in return, have not, frankly, demanded almost anything in return for the deal that we, the taxpayers, we, the government, have been given these companies. So we don't make them tell us how much, research and development they put into these kind of medicines. We don't make them tell us how much profit they're making off of each vial, spending on their, billions and billions of dollars of marketing costs and lobbying costs that don't have anything to do with research. So we think there's a really good reason why the industry doesn't want this transparency that Karyn mentioned, and that is because that would would be some pretty embarrassing data for them. They're going to they would have to reveal that they're spending a bunch of money promoting themselves and making profits and not innovating and making new medicines for people who need them.
Well, and to quick follow-up for you as well, Fran Quigley, isn't part of that expenditure that they're not sharing with the rest of the public, isn't that in fact expenditure on lobbying and other activities designed to preserve and maybe enhance the special privileges the government gives them, whether it is this exclusive patent rights, sometimes for medications we have that have been developed at public expense by the people themselves. So this exclusivity of patent and so on, aren't they in fact, among other things, spending a fair amount of money or a large amount of money on lobbying here in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere to make sure that that privilege is protected for themselves?
RJ, you're absolutely right. It is that is frankly the true success story of the last generation or so of the pharmaceutical industry, is what they've managed to wring out of the government for being one of the top spenders on lobbying and campaign contributions. They have, they've written the rules to benefit them and to make, record-breaking profits. It's one of the most profitable industries in modern capitalism. But the medicine that Karyn and others rely on is actually is oftentimes it's discovered with taxpayer dollars. And in this case, insulin's a 95-year-old medicine. This is not an industry that is making its success by innovating. As you say, it's succeeding because it has rigged the game. And Congress and various administrations have been complicit in that, and that's what we want to reverse. It's time for them to start being transparent. It's trying to start making the price reflect what it actually costs to manufacture the medicine.
So, Karyn Wofford, let's flip to the personal side of it for a second, if we can. We've talked about a little bit about the economics and the policy, the global issue. What's it like to depend on insulin? What is it like in terms of whether it's acquiring and paying the copay on the medication itself, or, God forbid, hopefully this doesn't happen if you have to go without it. What's it like as a personal experience, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit, being a diabetic and requiring this medication?
Yeah, I don't mind talking about that at all. It's a little bit scary to be 100% dependent on something that's controlled by somebody else and something that's so expensive. My husband and I have had to sacrifice a lot just to pay for insulin. There have been times where I questioned if we would be able to pay for it. And I think one thing people don't really fully understand is with type 1 diabetics, if they don't have insulin, they don't live. And a lot of things that type 1s will do consist of skipping injections or just doing what they can to not take as much insulin as they need to. And even if it doesn't cause the more extreme, such as death, it causes long-term complications. So it's definitely a fearful way of living. Definitely.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I gather, I don't know your insurance situation, but Karyn, I gather that if you have insurance, the co-payments and all that sort of thing, the deductibles, the out-of-pocket costs are still quite substantial, right?
It's very substantial. Insurance plans change every year, so it's definitely a surprise every time my insurance plan goes over into the new year. But right now I'm on a high deductible plan, so we have to pay out a substantial amount of our income towards that high deductible, paying full price ticket price for insulin. And then they'll come in and pay a little bit of it, but it's still, few $100s a month for us, if not more, depending on how much I have to take, because it does vary.
So here's an open question for either one of you, Fran Quigley or Karyn Wofford, but the question is this. Okay, and again, we're talking about the government-protected monopoly on patent rights for, in this case, for insulin, and the upcoming demonstration to bring that to public attention. But before we talk about the demonstration, the question is this, okay, the counter-argument you hear from conservatives, from the right, and from people who are in the pocket of of the pharmaceutical industry is this. They say, well, we need to be wiser consumers of healthcare services, and then the markets will take care of everything, and the markets, the free market will bring down the cost of insulin. So, Karyn, I guess I'll throw it to you first, Karyn. How's that comparison shopping for the cheapest, most efficient insulin manufacturer? How's that working out for you?
I mean, everything's expensive that I've come across. I've tried a lot of different things and talked a lot with my doctor. And it is hard to keep switching insulins. I've done that a couple of times, trying to land on something that's a little cheaper, which is disruptive to, a diabetic's routine. Any diabetic knows it's very fragile process to get your blood sugar under control, and constantly switching does not help things. But even looking for other options in insulin, I found them to be pretty close in price.
So, Fran, Quigley, it sounds like there is no free market in that's nonsense, that's bogus, that these prices all aggregate probably around a common or similar price point. And is that just an excuse to allow the price gouging at people's expense to continue?
Yeah, RJ, it's interesting because the pharmaceutical industry, even in their talking points, they won't push this free market rhetoric too far, because it is the very opposite of a free market. It's an incredibly protected industry. The most typical problem is when a corporation has a patent, a monopoly on a product, on a medicine that people need, and the life essential medicine, so they'll pay whatever they have to, and there's no competition. So it's obviously the opposite of free market, especially when the government is the top purchaser, and the government has funded some of the most critical research for the medicines. But insulin's actually an unusual case in that there's only 3 manufacturers of insulin. It is off patent, and because it is a 95-year-old medicine with a few modifications in the process. But those 3 manufacturers, it's Eli Lilly and Sanofi and Novo Nordisk, I believe, and Karyn can correct me if I'm wrong, but they actually have raised their prices together over the course of the past decades. In the price of insulin from Eli Lilly, for instance, has raised 1,100+% in that time. And so they're the target of an anti-collusion lawsuit pending, a class action lawsuit pending in U.S. District Court, saying that this is exactly the opposite of what you say, RJ, is that, this is certainly not a free market competition. You would think if there are 3 different manufacturers, they would compete on price, and why they deny this, the data show that the price goes up together again and again and again, and nobody tries to compete on price. So it's not a free market in the medicines world.
No, it certainly doesn't sound like it. And Karyn Wofford, you wrote a piece, as we mentioned earlier, on this upcoming demonstration, again, September 9th, as I read in front of me now, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. across from Eli Lilly headquarters, South Delaware. That's here in Washington, I assume. Is that correct? Is that here in Washington, D.C., or where is that?
It's actually going to be in Indianapolis. That's where the Eli Lilly headquarters are.
Okay, so what are we demonstrating for there? I can't make it myself. So I was hoping it was here in D.C., but what will people be demonstrating for, and how can people find out more about it?
Well, there will be an online day of action the day before. You can follow T1 International, and they're releasing a lot of information about it. But we do welcome anybody who wants to come out with us and demonstrate out in front of Eli Lilly, make signs, try to portray what it's like to be a type 1 diabetic, having to pay for insulin. We're really trying to paint that picture as well. And then just sort of support the things that we're asking, again, for transparency and for ultimately the price to come down on insulin, and let them know how many people are actually supporting this, because diabetes affects, I can't come up with the numbers right off the top of my head, but an astronomical amount of people in the United States. So it will eventually become a problem for the majority, if not already, the United States.
Right, and according to the American Diabetes Association, I did a little homework, 1.25 1.25 million Americans have type 1 diabetes. So we got about 30 seconds left. Fran Quigley, I may be doing you a disservice here by asking you a tough question. Your website is prescriptionforthepeople.org, but just as a closing thought, why should this be an issue for people of faith, since your group is people of faith for access to medicines?
Right, people of faith from across the moral and secular humanist community and all different types of religious denominations, care deeply about the issue, understand the need, and frankly the demand that all of us care about folks who are in need of medicines should be getting access to. The idea of folks making record-breaking profits off it is not consistent with any faith tradition. So it's a question of mobilizing the existing concern, the existing moral, principle, and folks taking action in the name of their faith or in the name of their community or whatever is motivating them. Because this just offends the sensibilities of people across the spectrum: Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, Protestant, Jewish, Christian, what have you. This isn't right. It's immoral, and it's a bad deal for all of us, even if we are not persons with diabetes or another life-threatening illness. And we need to stop it because most people understand this is just flat out wrong.
Well, I think you're right. I can't think offhand of a spiritual or philosophical tradition whose moral underpinning consists of tough luck. But unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. So Fran Quigley of People of Faith for Access to Medicines and Karyn Wofford, thanks to both of you for your good work in this area, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, RJ. Appreciate the opportunity.